Let's talk about the 4 steps to forecast gross profit. Step 1 is study the supply chain and cost structure. So let's go through this in a little bit more detail. What are you going to learn? You're going to understand what costs are deducted to derive gross profit. Gross doesn't mean bad. It means good. Identify which parts of the supply chain a company controls. So let's now look at gross margin. It measures the efficiency from a production perspective. The first task of a management team is to grow the company's revenue. Its second task is to improve the efficiency of the process of creating its products and services. To do this, the management team must focus on reducing the costs related to producing that product and services. And this is usually much harder than it sounds. A key message I want you to understand is that improving gross profit margin is tough. So how do we calculate the gross profit margin of a product or a service? Well, it's the revenue minus the cost related to creating that goods, right? We're talking about goods right now. So it could be raw materials, it could be production staff, it could be depreciation related to fixed assets used in production. And what about calculating the cost of creating services? Well, that's the cost of developers, that's the cost of consultants, and those types of things. And it can be referred to COGS, we often call it COGS, can be referred to as cost of goods sold or cost of goods and services. Let's take a look into the Coffee Works factory, and here you can see in the warehouse stacks of bags of 60-kilo bags of coffee from around the world. And there's Dale talking to a group of people. In fact, that's one of my interns who was there at the factory. And you can get a picture of how tall those stacks are. Now, truthfully, we don't want all that in our factory. We would prefer just-in-time inventory. But sometimes coffee being a crop that is harvested at a certain time, it may be that you only had a certain time to grab a great particular deal on that coffee. So this is what the green coffee looks like, and there is a little bit closer look at that green coffee. This is the main cost of goods sold for a coffee company. All right, let's go back into what are costs that are included in the COGS. Costs directly related to the production of the product or service. The question really is, what does not count as cost of goods sold? To answer this, to understand this, you want to answer this question. Is this item required to produce the product or service? Things that are not included in this are office rent or sales salaries or marketing costs. These things are not related to producing the product. So what are the common cost of goods sold items? Raw material, as in a coffee company, coffee beans. Maybe in a clothing company, fabric. A car company, steel. And then there's direct labor. This is the people who produce the product. In a coffee company, it's the direct labor of the coffee roasters. And in an infotech company, it's the direct labor of the programmers. In a consulting company, it's the direct labor of consultants. And then the third thing, so you have raw material, you have direct labor, and the third thing is overhead expenses and depreciation that are directly related to production. Now, I want to talk to you briefly about the idea of understanding a company's free cash flow story. And that's really a huge part of being a good analyst, is really understanding the story. And I'm going to break it down into 3 simple ways of looking at that story. The first way is revenue, second, cost, and third, capital. Now, when it comes to revenue, which we've already looked at in prior lectures, it's price times quantity. I like to show that Facebook or Meta is really a price story. How do they get more revenue from each user? It's not a quantity story because everybody's on Facebook. But when you look at Tesla, on the other hand, Tesla is a quantity story. How do we get 10 times the output of our gigafactories? So these are the 2 common ways that we think about the story related to revenue. Now, this isn't in some textbook. This is just the way I look at it. The next is cost of goods sold. When we talk about cost, there's two core costs: cost of goods sold, or cost of goods and services, and OPEX, or operating expenses. Now, you'll notice I often use cost of goods and services because service companies have become much more of a bigger component of that. Now, the final one is capital, which we haven't gotten to. We'll get into when we get to the balance sheet of the company. Now, let's just look at the cost of goods sold for a moment. I just updated this number and I realized that our core asset is 47 years old. This is a roasting machine you see in a picture. It's not the original roasting machine we got, but we got this one secondhand. It's a 1976 Petrocini roaster. And one of the things we heard from Petrocini that they used this roaster in some prisons, and they use it to make coffee for inmates, and what they use as the power is wood, and they put wood in the back of it and then they roast. Ours is powered by the energy that's used to heat it is gas. And what's happening in that machine is that coffee beans, the raw coffee beans, are being roasted, and then what we can see is that they are a major cost of goods sold. They're put into the bags. A bag is a part of the cost of goods sold, but it's a small part compared to the coffee bean. All right, now to continue on with the story of Coffee Works. Previously, we looked at the revenue story. Now we're going to look at the revenue and gross profit story. So here we have what I call phase one of Coffee Works from 1996 to 2003. That's the first 8 years of revenue and gross profit. And you can see revenue still didn't got past $500,000, but it wasn't much. I'm never really proud at all of the way we started up our business. We were hit by the 97 crisis, which we didn't anticipate, and you pay a price. And we just didn't grow the business the way we had hoped in the beginning. And you can see even by 2002 and 2003, our gross profits started falling, despite the fact that revenue was generally rising. Now, this was because we took on a particular customer that was a very low margin business, but high volume. And we did that particular job for a while until we realized we can't do this anymore. And we went and talked to them. We tried to get the price up. We couldn't. Eventually, we had to get out of the deal. So that moved us into phase two, which is 2004 to 2011. This second 8 years of revenue and gross profit, you can see that we finally started to recover the gross profit. It was flat, and down in 2003, 2004, but it was 2005 and 6 and 7 that it started to rise. And then we saw it doing pretty well. Then we go to phase three, 2012 to 2019. That was just before the COVID crisis. That's the last full year before COVID. And that I call that the third 8 years of revenue and gross profit. Revenue keeps going up, but you can see we had some issues in relation to gross profit at that time that we were working on. And then I just will show you phase four, and this is the latest numbers I just have been going through, and it shows the disaster that was COVID. In fact, in 2020, revenue was down 44% from 2019 due to the government COVID lockdowns. And in 2021, it was 53% below 2019. In 2022, it was 29% below 2019. And hopefully by 2023, we should be the year where our revenue comes back to 2019. This shows when you shut down an economy, basically it is a disaster. We survive. We could have done a lot of things better. But the most important thing is we survived, and we didn't lose any management team member. That, I feel like, was great, and we didn't lose any salespeople throughout that. Now, let's look at Fastenal. Unfortunately, we don't find much information about the cost of goods sold for Fastenal, and many companies don't provide much information. You just have to look at the gross margin and figure it out. The company does not provide a breakdown of the different costs involved. However, Fastenal tells us a bit about its supply chain structure. So all you're going to see in the P&L of Fastenal is here's the cost of goods sold. That's it. And you got to then look at it and think, how is that going to change? So Fastenal is not a typical manufacturer. It acts more like a distributor and a service provider. Here we can see in 2021, approximately 96% of our consolidated net sales were attributable to products manufactured by other companies. The remaining 4% related to products manufactured, modified, or repaired by our manufacturing business. So they do some manufacturing, but it's tiny. And then at the bottom, it says we may add additional services in the future. However, we engage in these activities primarily as a service to our customers and expect them to continue to contribute in the range of 4 to 6%. They're never going to be a manufacturer. That's not their business. Now, Fastenal sources most of its products from China. So if we were to analyze what's going on with China and the global market, we may be able to make some conclusions there. Here it says we use a large number of suppliers, but these suppliers are heavily concentrated in a single geographic area, Asia. Within Asia, suppliers in China represent a significant source of the product. I would say it's probably almost all of their production has been coming out of China, which made it difficult during the COVID time for sure. Now, let's take a look at Samsung in the infotech space. Here's the notes to financial statements, which help you gain more insights. And what we can see here is in Samsung's case, you have to go to note 21 in the financial statements to find out more about COGS. And here we are at 21, and we can see that the raw materials used, merchandise purchased, and other is a huge one, and also depreciation is a huge. They are a manufacturer. They are a capital-intensive business, and that's why depreciation is such a large item, and it's slow to change, that's for sure. So Samsung also is very transparent about its raw materials. We can look at its CE division and say display panels, the purchase price, the main suppliers. I mean, that is a level of transparency that most companies don't give you, right? So it tells you a detailed overview of the items they purchase from which supplier and at what price. Such a breakdown is very rare, but it helps us to forecast and analyze a company like Samsung. So let's wrap it up. In studying the supply chain and cost structure, we learned to identify all costs related to goods production or providing services and determine which parts of the supply chain the company operates. So what have you learned in this? Well, gross profit is revenue minus costs related to making the goods or service. And analyzing the supply chain helps you understand which parts of the operations are under the company's control. Congratulations, you've made it to the end. What's next? You're going to learn the framework that we use to assess the profitability of an industry. I'll see you in that section.
I did have a background in finance, but for me, the transformation was that I learned like something that is practical, and then it helped start my career in. So what I'm trying to say is that in this course, saying that I already transformed would be an understatement. This boot camp helped me propel my career because it actually gave me a lot of opportunities. It taught me how to value companies, the importance of LinkedIn. Actually, now I'm also getting more people talking about, do you want to do work this, work that? Before, no one would actually text me about job. So all that I've learned a lot, and the connection here is absolutely perfect. And I would miss everyone after this boot camp. See you guys in the future.